One of the things I think we need to do is to climb off some of our high horses and say we have a shared humanity.
Yes,
We're all
definitely.
good, we're all bad, we're all capable of doing terrible things to one another. You've seen it firsthand, but we're also capable of great courage and great nobility and of taking responsibility and breaking the cycle.
Absolutely. And, there is too much emphasis on the negative as a country, I think, in Australia.
We've become very negative, haven't we?
We've become incredibly negative, and I don't know whether that comes from the fact that we're in a very privileged position in comparison to other countries around the world. So suddenly now we have to turn on our own. I guess part of my battle is saying to people, well, we're just human. Like, stop trying to divide us, you know? And it's almost like I've become a conservative, you know? My family once, we voted Labor, we were staunch Labor people, and we've, if you like, been pushed the other way. And I feel like as a conservative, I'm always trying to reach out to the other side and go, hey, you know what? We're the same. We're human.
You see some quite ugly racism in country towns especially, with the non-Aboriginal people saying it's all the fault of Aboriginal people. But here's the irony. Many of the elites today are making the whole debate much harder to have because they're not blaming the Aboriginal people. They're saying they're victims and we whiteys are the problem.
Yes.
It's all our fault. Our culture's the evil one that's done these terrible things.
Yes.
And what happens with both of those, we lose our humanity and our understanding that we're actually all in this together.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
And then dishonesty goes.
Yeah.
And you get virtue signalling, like let's change the date
Yes.
of Australia Day from people who want to engage in symbolism for reasons of loathing of our own culture.
Yes.
More than, I'm being really blunt here, I think, a genuine understanding of what's going to make a difference for Aboriginal people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, it is like a distraction, if you like. Well, we're not actually fixing any problems. So let's look over here to this lovely bit of symbolism that'll make you feel warm and fuzzy while we don't actually get to the crux of the issue and deal with it on a human basis.
Yeah.
And that's what frustrates me the most is that, if you're a human and you've got white skin, you're not allowed to have an opinion on anything to do with anyone of dark skin. It's when there's so much goodwill out there for non-Aboriginal people toward Aboriginal people, if we get people of Aboriginal descent continually who are in the elite of this country, who are turning around and continually saying, it's all the fault of the white man, yet they themselves have had all this wonderful opportunity, have paved a way for them to, become elitists in this country, and turn around and say everything's the white man's fault and I'm still a victim, but you're not actually helping the most marginalised Aboriginal people who are nothing but Aboriginal, who have their culture intact, who have their language intact. They are the most marginalised. And to turn around and say to all those people with goodwill, it's all your fault, that goodwill is going to fade at some point. People are going to get sick of continually being called a name. And when they're there, they've got, they've opened themselves and they're saying, what can we do to assist? Effectively, they're stopping any kind of understanding of what it simply is to be human, to help in the best way that they can with these circumstances, with this situation. It's like, it is far more important not to cause offence, I guess, than it is to address real issues. And people don't want to cause offence. People don't want to put themselves in the firing line, if you like. And I've had a gutful, and I'm quite happy to stand there while guns are blazing, because it's time the nonsense came to an end so we can actually start to really, address these issues on the basis that we're all human.
Terrifically insightful remarks. A comment, if I may, and then a lead into your thoughts as a question on something else. On Australia Day, it seems to me we ought to work hard to make Australia Day a day when we reflect more on the good and the bad. If you move the date, you'll forget the need for an honest debate about what happened, because there were aspects of it that were noble, the attempt to rehabilitate people, and in fact the sailing orders were very clear that the local people were to be treated with great respect. That was all in the orders. But then there were the utterly dreadful things that happened. The disease, the massacres that followed later, which were truly appalling. I mean, unbelievable. And it wasn't until after the Mile Creek massacre that anybody was really brought to justice for what they'd done. My point, though, is that the best thing we can do on Australia Day, in my view, is to celebrate the good things and reflect on the things that we need to learn from. That'd be my sort of comment. And then we come to the issue that you've just raised, which is, what do we actually do to make a difference? We've got to, I know I've said it before, a bit hackneyed now, but break the cycle. Of all the terrible things that I saw, and I did see a lot of terrible things in my 19 years in public life, it was in your hometown, Alice Springs, the one that's most deeply seared in my memory. I was out there on business of some sort, and I walked home one evening after I'd been to dinner with a couple of members of my staff, and outside the casino were lots of Aboriginal kids, and you know how athletic a lot of them are, and they were kicking a football around and moving with enormous agility and what have you, but there was a bunch of them sitting on a bench, and it struck me that they looked really pretty miserable. So I went over and had a yarn with them, and they opened up after a while. And I actually said to one of them, "Mate, you're really looking worried, what's wrong?" He hadn't said much. And he said, "Our mums are in there. They're blowing the welfare check." He said, "A couple of days, my mates and I, we're going to be starving. And then we'll break into the school tuck shop to get something to eat. And then people will say how terrible we are, and we'll end up having getting into all sorts of trouble. What are we supposed to do?" And for me, that was a terrible moment. It just seems to me, and I suppose I'm asking your opinion on this, what we've got to do in this whole debate is switch our attention to the children, to the next generation. How do we break the cycle? How do we get a group of them through, like your children, but in much bigger numbers, who have grown up emotionally secure and well-nourished and well-educated? Isn't it time to say, let's stop talking about the rights of adults and painting them as victims without in any way diminishing the challenges they faced, and turn our attention to the next generation, the kids, the ones who can't speak for themselves but are actually most vulnerable and most damaged?
Yes. Well, again, it's, I think, if we look at what's gone on in our country, there has been a stigma around, removing Australian children who happen to be Aboriginal because of, what's happened in our country's history with the stolen generation. And I think that issue has been conflated. I think it's not recognised that within the stolen generation were many other stories than the most popular narrative that we know of, that children were removed because of their skin colour and, pushed into assimilation. There were, of course, many different stories with regard to the stolen generation.
Many different stories.
And that's a part of, again, acknowledging our history in its entirety and not particular narratives. That's recognising our history as human beings and not holding, all white Australians responsible who weren't even around during that time for what happened in our history. And, you know, we need to get away. And what I see a lot now is the way the media use trigger words. You know, they use the term, I think because David Gillespie recently said that, you know, he believes Aboriginal children should be adopted, and I agree with him entirely. But then you get news articles that will say, well, you know, politicians want a second stolen generation. That's no way helpful for those children in those really dire circumstances who are begging to have the same opportunities as the kids whose parents run these media organisations, who can flippantly use terms like that in order to trigger an audience. They have utter disregard for these kids in those circumstances. And then those who are being driven by their ideologies are going to jump on that and use that as their focus instead of focusing again on the children.
Kids.
And these are adults behaving very selfishly, in my view. When one can't look within themselves to make change because of their own insecurities about who they are, that becomes damaging, because there's children relying on these adults to be adults and put their welfare first. And I am a big believer that, you know, there's a segregation going on with kids in care, and Aboriginal children are treated differently to other kids. And this is a result of the Bringing Them Home report. This is a result of the stigma attached to the stolen generation. And there's a reluctance to remove Aboriginal kids. They should be treated just like any other Australian child.
It's actually as though we have one law for non-Indigenous Australians and another suspended law, or the same law, but it's suspended.
Yes.
For Indigenous people.
Yes.
And it seems to me to be a gross injustice.
It is.
Against Aboriginal children.
It is.
Gross injustice.
It's the racism of low expectations. It's like, no, hands off, we're going to let these kids be in these, you know, horrible circumstances and we're not going to lift the bar to where, you know, it should be alongside other Australian children.
Thank you for watching this episode. We appreciate your support. If you value vital conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel there, and also click the notification bell to stay up to date with new releases.